Today is the first episode of the Ringtail review, and in today's review we'll be looking at Inazuma 11 on the DS. The story is simple and effective. I especially like the story concept of having to recruit members to form a football club, and then having that act as the base for the game. It's really well done, and it gives so much freedom to create your own Raimon. And the game encourages you to go out and scout new faces to build your team. This feature gets unlocked relatively quickly into the story. I think it's either chapter 2 or 3, but that's really early given the new Inazuma standards, and the whole theme of building up Raimon from nothing to a legendary club again is simple but really effective. Also, a quick side note, I really enjoy how if you use scouts in the story, they actually interact with what's going on in the story. So the best example is when you're coming out of the Inabikari Centre, and there's a reveal of Mr. Raimon being Natsumi's father and all the rest of it. But one of your scouts actually gets a piece of dialogue here, which I find is quite a little pleasant bit of detail. And it's those little small details that I really enjoy in games. Having that, plus not having the story impact any of the matches, like you're not required to have anyone in the field except Endo, which fair enough, main character moment. There is a moment where you have Kurimatsu and Kabiyama you must have them on the pitch during the Kidokawa Session match. Other than that, you didn't really need anyone specific on. But the main concept of being that you can create your own team and challenge Japan's toughest teams is fantastic. They also balance the story and gameplay well as well. They don't overload the player with story at the start. They give them little bits of story and gameplay. Works well, and it keeps the player engaged. Like, it's not too overbearing. This doesn't last the entire game though, as in chapter 6 you get a lot of story at the beginning with very little gameplay in between. While to some this might be a bad thing, in my eyes it makes the most sense, as the story really sets up a lot of backstory regarding Teikoku and how they're linked to Raimon. It only makes sense to give that amount of story shown. Overall though, the story was pretty decent. It was a solid opener to this series. Nothing too wacky or crazy with its plot, nice and simple, and it really sets the standard going forward. I really enjoyed the story. Focusing more on the gameplay now, and it's really unique and amazing. To describe the game to friends, I would say it's Pokemon, but instead of battles, it's football. Which is a fun comparison to make on paper. Sports games and role-playing games just shouldn't mix, but level 5 added their own secret sauce to the Krabby Patty formula here, and it works wonderfully. Typically with JRPGs, you usually find people that go, oh, this is just a insert game title here clone. But with Inazuma, it has its own identity, which really makes it stand out. There's a few complaints I have with the gameplay, and the primary one being that the encounter rate is abhorrent. You encounter teams far too frequently, and that's very annoying to me. It takes you out of the gameplay, and it really just kind of drags on, because it's usually just you end up being a drone at certain points in the game, where it's just they're not challenging at all. It's just more of a nuisance than anything else. More so when I'm trying to get through a door or move down onto the next area to progress to the story, I would get caught on a frame of the door or the post or even an NPC, and because of that, 9 out of 10 times I would just get an encounter, which really annoyed me. It annoys me slightly, and I'm happy that there's an in-game item that prevents the whole encounters from happening. The type of battles you get can keep the player on their toes, as they'll not just try to score goals, but they'll try to win possession, or they'll try to not concede, or not to lose possession. This on paper is a good idea, but in execution, along with a high encounter rate, it just annoyed me more than anything else. It became more of a task to do these things, and in most cases you just end up losing, or in my case it's just one game mode. The last thing I have issues with is the time it takes to get your scout reports from Natsumi. They were far too long. Given that it's tracked by how many steps you take, the most optimal thing to do is just to run around in a circle inside of one of the Raimon buildings. Every time I went to the club, from the club room to one of the buildings, I would get an encounter, and you already know my thoughts on that. The point is, they can really drag on, especially when you really want to get a player from the club you just beat, and you have to wait a good while before you can finally get that call. You get back to the club room and you see the report, only to find out that the report doesn't have the player you had hoped for. Not having control over who's on the scout report it does make sense. However, it can cause players issue when they can't get the player that they want, and they have to keep re-rolling the scout reports and waiting for that awful time It's not a pleasant experience and it can be quite a mood killer. Overall though, the gameplay really sets the bar high for future games, and I hope that Level 5 can really continue to improve their craft and make the next game an absolute banger. My score for Inazuma 11 is a 4 out of 5, and I highly recommend that you play it. Let me know what you think of the game from your experiences in the comments below, and with that I am off.